Okay, so you know how it is, you're following a story, you see like signs of progress, maybe even a peace treaty, and then like seemingly out of nowhere the old tensions flare up again,
Yeah.
and you're left with like this knot in your stomach. That's how I've been feeling about the Horn of Africa,
Right.
particularly Ethiopia and Eritrea. I mean, it feels like just yesterday we were marking their historic reconciliation.
Yeah, it was a huge
Well,
achievement.
worthy of a Nobel Prize, right?
Right. Yeah.
But lately the news has been pretty bleak.
Yeah.
It's all pointing towards a very real risk of conflict again, and it's concerning. It's deeply concerning.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think a lot of our listeners are trying to piece together, like, what's happening? How did we get here?
Right.
And that's what we're going to do today
That's exactly right.
in this deep dive.
Yeah, a deep dive into the heart of the issue.
Hmm.
We need to really understand why this situation is deteriorating so rapidly.
Hmm.
And I think to do that, we need to look closely at what's driving this potential return to war.
Right.
We've gathered a range of sources for this deep dive. I mean, we have the latest news headlines, expert analysis from people who, really understand the region and its history. And of course, the historical backdrop is essential here.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got a lot to cover.
We do.
But our goal today is pretty straightforward. We want to cut through all the complexity and the conflicting reports.
Right. There's a lot of noise.
Yeah, there's a lot of noise out there.
We want to get to the signal.
Yeah, we want to get to the
Yeah.
signal. And so we're going to extract like the core information from these sources to answer the fundamental question. How did we get from celebrating this Nobel Peace Prize for bringing Ethiopia and Eritrea together
Yeah.
to now facing the possibility of them going back to war?
It's a great question.
So we're going to give you like a clear and insightful understanding of what is unfolding.
Right.
And we're going to try to do it without overwhelming you with details.
Yeah, we don't want to overload anyone.
So where do we begin to even unpack this? This history between these two countries is complicated.
It is. And to really understand the current danger, we need to go back and understand the history, the deep and often painful history that both ties and divides Ethiopia and Eritrea.
Right.
I mean, we're talking about Eritrea's annexation by Ethiopia all the way back in 1962.
Yeah.
And that wasn't exactly met with open arms by the Eritrean people.
Right, of course not. It's understandable.
So what followed was a brutal 30-year war for independence,
Right.
which Eritrea finally achieved in 1993 under the leadership of Isaias Afwerki and his Eritrean People's Liberation Front, or the EPLF.
Yeah, the EPLF. And it's easy to forget that right after Eritrean independence relations between the newly formed Eritrea under the EPLF and Ethiopia, which at that time was led by the Tigray People's Liberation Front, or TPLF, after they overthrew Mengistu in 1991,
Right.
were actually pretty good. I mean, it seemed like a fresh start.
Yeah, there was a lot of hope.
There was a lot of optimism, for
Yeah.
sure.
Absolutely. But sadly, it was short-lived. That initial period of good relations didn't last. By the mid-90s, the relationship between the EPLF and the TPLF had really soured, and this shift ultimately led to the Ethio-Eritrean War from 1998 to 2000.
Really a devastating war.
It was. The spark that ignited the conflict was this dispute over the border town of Badme,
Right?
and the fighting resulted in an estimated 80,000 deaths. It was brutal.
A huge loss of life, yeah.
Yeah.
And what followed was what some call a frozen conflict,
Yeah.
like a ceasefire where the guns are silent, but the underlying issues are still there.
Exactly. There were no active battles, but no real peace either. Severed ties, simmering tensions. It lasted right up until 2018.
Okay, so that kind of sets the stage, right? Long history of conflict, brief moments of hope, and then 2018 arrives, a pivotal year. Abiy Ahmed becomes the prime minister of Ethiopia.
Yeah.
And one of his first big moves was to reach out to Eritrea.
Right.
And what followed was a remarkable reconciliation.
It seemed like a new chapter.
It did. Diplomatic relations were restored and they were normalized.
And there were even efforts to rebuild those economic ties.
Right. Yeah. And this was what earned Abiy Ahmed the Nobel Peace Prize in 2019.
A sign that peace was possible.
It seemed like a concrete sign that peace was possible.
But this is where things get complicated. This is where we see maybe the groundwork being laid for the crisis we're seeing today. Because this alliance between Abiy's Ethiopia and Afwerki's Eritrea very quickly translated into Eritrea's direct involvement in the Tigray War.
Right, which raged from 2020 to 2022.
That's right. Eritrean forces fought alongside the Ethiopian government against their common enemy, the TPLF.
Yeah.
And the human cost of this war was staggering.
It was.
There were accusations of really severe human rights abuses,
Right.
even ethnic cleansing.
Absolutely. So then the Tigray War officially ends with the Pretoria Agreement in November of 2022.
Right.
Brokered in South Africa between the Ethiopian government and the TPLF. but who was noticeably absent from these negotiations.
Eritrea.
Eritrea. And you can imagine that this exclusion became a major sticking point.
Oh, absolutely. Eritrea was not happy about their longtime enemy, the TPLF, potentially regaining power in Tigray.
Yeah, I mean, if we look at the bigger picture, Eritrea felt completely sidelined.
Right.
They had played a significant role in the Tigray War, but then they were excluded from the peace talks.
It's understandable that they felt that way.
Right, and the Pretoria Agreement explicitly called for the withdrawal of all foreign forces from Tigray.
Which included Eritrean troops.
Exactly.
But there have been reports that Eritrean forces have remained within Ethiopian territory.
Despite the agreement.
Yes.
So this created a lot of mistrust.
It did. A lot of resentment on all sides.
So then we move into 2023, early part of 2025, and we see this peace, this fragile peace, just start to crumble.
Unraveling.
The mistrust is growing, and Addis Ababa is accusing Asmara of working to undermine the Pretoria Agreement.
Right. They're saying that Eritrea is providing support to insurgent groups within Ethiopia.
Right, so further destabilizing the region. And then if we look at it from Eritrea's perspective, they're seeing Ethiopia's statements about needing access to the Red Sea as a direct threat to their sovereignty.
Yeah, they haven't forgotten Ethiopia's interest in using ports in Somaliland.
Right?
They see this rhetoric as a broader strategic ambition, that it could target Eritrea's own ports.
Right. They're ports of Assab and Massawa.
Exactly. And for Eritrea, those ports are essential. It's their connection to the global economy. It's part of their national identity.
It's their lifeline.
Yeah, it's a lifeline.
So this Red Sea issue is a major flashpoint. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed is saying that Ethiopia needs a port.
He's been very clear about that.
He has been very clear.
And Eritrea sees this as a potential precursor to military action.
Right.
That Ethiopia might try to seize Eritrean territory.
To get that access.
Exactly. And from Eritrea's perspective, it's a zero-sum game.
So how does Eritrea respond?
Well, in October 2023, they entered into a security pact with Egypt and Somalia.
Wow.
And if you look at the geopolitical context, this seems like a direct countermeasure to Ethiopia's ambitions.
Right.
They're trying to build a regional alliance.
Yeah, to protect themselves from what they see as a growing Ethiopian threat.
Exactly.
So while all this is happening externally, there are also problems internally within Tigray.
Yeah.
The TPLF, which has been a major player in this whole saga,
Right.
they're not unified, they're divided.
Geek divisions.
Yeah, and there are two main factions vying for power within the Tigray Interim Regional Administration, or TIRA.
Right. You have the faction led by Debretsion Gebremichael and the other by Getachew Reda.
Right, so it's like this major political party splitting into two camps.
Yeah, each with his own leadership and supporters.
And this is creating a power vacuum.
Yeah, and that vacuum can be exploited by external forces.
Absolutely. So this internal power struggle within Tigray, it's critical to understanding how things are unfolding.
It is. By early March 2025, the faction that's loyal to Debretsion, they started to openly challenge the TIRA.
Which is set up by the Pretoria Agreement to stabilize the region.
Exactly.
So this is just adding to the instability.
It is a major element of instability.
So then things really escalate in March 2025. On March 10th, Getachew Reda, the head of TIRA,
Right.
he suspends several high-ranking military commanders who were aligned with Debretsion.
Accusing them of plotting to seize power.
Yes, so it's getting serious. And then Lieutenant General Sadkin Gebretensay,
A very influential figure.
a very respected figure, he issues a public warning saying that war between Ethiopia and Eritrea now seems inevitable.
That's a huge statement.
It is. It's a really concerning assessment coming from someone like him.
Absolutely.
And then the situation on the ground, it just explodes. The next day, March 11th, reports come out that dissident units of the Tigrayan Defense Forces, the TDF, who are loyal to Debretsion,
Right.
they take control of eastern Tigray, including the city of Adigrat.
They basically ousted the TIRA-backed administration.
Wow.
And there were reports of clashes in Adigudum.
Right.
And at the same time, forces aligned with Debretsion's faction of the TPLF, they attacked TIRA offices in several locations.
Really?
They even detained members of the interim cabinet.
Wow.
And they seized control of major towns, including Mekelle, the regional capital.
They took over the radio station as well.
Yeah, they took control of the main radio station.
So this is a direct challenge to the TIRA.
It is a serious escalation.
And the other political groups within Tigray, they condemned this.
They did. They condemned Debretsion's faction.
And they even said that they believed that these actions were coordinated with Eritrea.
Which suggests external interference.
Yeah, potentially.
It's a serious accusation.
And the international community is watching The French Foreign Ministry raised its alert level for the Tigray region to red.
Which is the highest level.
Yeah, the highest level.
A serious indication of danger.
Yeah, and there were reports of aid organizations pulling their people out.
Ordering their staff to evacuate.
Yeah, and Peyton Knopf and Alexander Rondos, who are experts on the region.
Very knowledgeable.
Yeah, they published an opinion piece warning of imminent war.
And Eritrea responded.
They did. The Eritrean Minister of Information condemned General Sadkin's assessment that war was inevitable.
Yeah, they pushed back against that.
But in the middle of all of this, the head of the TRA, he travels to Addis Ababa to brief Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed.
He's trying to find a solution?
Yeah, and he also met with international delegations.
Looking for support.
Yeah, and the message that we're hearing from analysts and officials on the ground is that there are troop movements on both sides of the border.
It's a very tense situation.
So it seems like the potential for a major regional conflict is very high right now.
Alarmingly high.
Yeah, and we need to ask ourselves, what is driving this? What are the fundamental factors that are pushing these two countries back towards war?
Well, first we have to remember the unresolved historical border dispute.
Right. It's never been fully settled.
And it remains a source of tension.
It's like a wound that hasn't healed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then there's the resentment and mistrust stemming from Eritrea's exclusion from the Pretoria Agreement.
Right.
They feel like they were a key player in the Tigray War.
They fought alongside Ethiopia.
And then they were shut out of the peace talks.
It's understandable that they feel betrayed.
Yeah, and they're concerned about the TPLF regaining influence.
And we can't forget about Ethiopia's need for access to the Red Sea.
Right.
And Eritrea's fear that this need will lead to aggression.
They see it as an existential threat.
These two objectives, they clash.
They do.
And our sources suggest that Eritrea has a pattern of regional interference.
There's a belief that they're exploiting the divisions within the TPLF.
Right.
To destabilize Tigray.
And to undermine the peace agreement.
And maybe to keep Ethiopia weak.
Yeah, it's a complex situation.
It is. And then you have the internal power struggles within the TPLF.
Right.
Which creates this vacuum that external actors can exploit.
And it's happening in a region that's already very unstable.
The Horn of Africa is a very volatile place.
You have the civil war in Sudan.
You have the ongoing challenges in Somalia.
So this is a very precarious regional environment.
And there's a fear that this instability could spread.
That it could create a belt of chaos.
Across the region.
That could embolden extremist groups.
Disrupt trade routes.
And the international community is calling for dialogue.
The U.S., the EU, the UK.
They're all urging restraint.
But it remains to be seen whether these efforts will be enough to prevent war.
So to sum it up, the peace in the Horn of Africa is very fragile. It's been shattered by these power struggles in Tigray.
And inflamed by historical grievances and Eritrea's fears.
And it's pushing the region towards potential conflict.
It's a very dangerous situation.
And this leaves us with a lot to think about. How is it that historical animosity, political aspirations, and competition for resources...
All these factors.
Yeah, how can they unravel peace efforts so quickly? What role do external actors play?
It's a complex question.
It is. And what are the consequences for the region and for the world?
Yeah, for global trade.
For international security.
This is something we all need to be paying attention to.
Absolutely. It's a complex situation with huge potential implications, and we encourage you to keep thinking about it, keep learning about it, and we'll be here to help you make sense of it all.
We'll be back with more deep dives soon.